We would like to welcome Professor Dominique Parish, who many of you will know as our previous Askellide president and who served on the Askellide executive for 12 years and is currently the Pro Vice Chancellor Learning and Teaching at Macquarie University. Dom will begin by telling us about her leadership journey to date.
Okay, so I have been quite deliberate in my planning for my leadership journey. I worked out some time ago, so a trained teacher, and I've always been in education, but I moved into working for myself in about 2004. And while I was in that role, I had an opportunity to see a lot of different other jobs, and I was awakened to the opportunities in higher education through that job that I had where I ran my own business. And it was in one of those opportunities, which was at the University of Wollongong, that I decided if I was ever going to lead my own business, it would be for a particular job. And then 12 months later, I was fortunate enough to be offered that job, and I took it. Now, once I was in that job, I decided that I wanted to work out where I wanted to go to, because I had very much just fallen into roles, and I wanted to think carefully about where I wanted to be at the end of my work career and how I was going to get there. And I knew that I wanted to work my way up to a senior role in education, in higher education. And, you know, I'm probably very focused and clear that the next role I want to move into is the final role I want to be in, which is I'd like to try and get to a DVCA level. Along the way, what I've done is I have looked for people, particularly women, who have been at the next stage that I wanted to be at, and I've talked to them and I've tried to understand what they've done to get to those roles. And then I've tried to map for myself how I could actually follow, if not a similar, a like-for-like path that would enable me to achieve the things that they have achieved. I was very deliberate and conscious about the mentors I chose. So at one point, I realised that the roles that I wanted to move into were completely dominated by males, so I got myself a male mentor. I realised that there was an evolving area of practice that I didn't have necessarily as strong in my resume as I needed it to be, so I took myself off and I undertook additional study. I made sure that I took on extracurricular activities that I thought would contribute to the skills and the capabilities that I would need to be successful in the next role, and then the next role, and then the next role that I wanted to progress to. So here I am sitting as a PVC. I have my eyes on the actual job I want and the place I want it to be in, and I'm planning the next pathway to getting to that end goal.
That's fantastic. Thank you. Could you tell us a little bit about who the key people have been, maybe not the names, but perhaps the roles, and how they've influenced your views and sort of helped you form who you are today?
So I guess I've got to start by saying probably the most significant influence that I've had is my dad, who himself navigated a childhood where he was told he'd be a nothing and a nobody, and ended up being a GP, and a very successful GP at that. My dad instilled in me from a very, very young age a very strong work ethic and an achievement ethic. You know, don't just sit back and look at what others have. Get out there and get it for yourself, and be active in your career and your aspirations and your future. He also was the person who probably taught me the importance of education, and that education not only opens doors, but it helps you develop the capabilities you need. And then finally, he was the bank of dad. So he paid for me to go to university and all the extra learning that I did. The mentor that I spoke about, the male mentor, was actually a senior deputy vice chancellor, and he was very strategic in his journey. He actually left the country and went to a different role to come back to the role that he wanted. So I did talk to him about how he navigated that. I think that the conversations I had with senior women in my sphere of practice, that was very pertinent for me, because they talked about the challenges that they encountered. And I worked out that I needed to make a commitment to doing certain things that may have been uncomfortable or not come easily, such as leave your home, leave your university, leave your children to go to the job that you want to go to. But make sure it's the right job that you want to go to and the right people that you're working for. So all of that was quite significant. I think the other people who have influenced me along the way are my children, and in particular my girls, because I've wanted to be a good role model and set a standard that they could take on board themselves. Plus, I wanted to be seen as a bit of a hero in their eyes. So they've always encouraged me to try and do better and to try and achieve.
Wonderful, thank you. And we'd like you to tell us about a rewarding experience that you've come across in your as a leader.
So I think probably the most rewarding experience happened at the end of last year. And last year was a very challenging year, as it was for most people, I think. But I, leading a portfolio, went through a change process, and it was a fairly significant change process. I ended up losing, from when I first arrived in the role to the end of last year, I think in total I've lost over 50 people from the portfolio. So that's a head count, that's not an FTE. It was a really challenging time because I was navigating that change process in an online environment. And, you know, that throws curveballs that you really probably don't expect or even consider maybe coming your way. And you have to react and you have to adapt and you have to roll with the punches. And as a 20, 30-year-old, I was a bit of a crazy who was probably not in check of my emotions and probably reacted more than I should have. And last year, probably the most grateful, the compliment I was most grateful for was when someone said to me, "I just don't know how you're keeping it together." And for me, having come from a 20, 30-year-old that was always emotional and probably wore a lot more emotions on their sleeves than they should have, and, you know, would fly off the handle quite quickly, that for me was the greatest and most rewarding compliment I could have received. I was told by a couple of senior leaders that, oh, well, obviously nothing phases you. And I'm thinking, wow, you know, that's to me, because I've worked very hard to learn about and develop emotional intelligence. And for me, that was an indictment of the fact that I had developed emotional intelligence. So, yeah.
That's good to hear a positive story out of such a terrible year. Okay, our final question is for you to tell us about a challenge that you've had to overcome as a leader.
So for me, I think there's a number of challenges. Choosing one's a tough one. There's something that there's two elements. I think there's challenge as a leader is that you often have to make, you have to achieve through other people. And so you have to encourage and enable and inspire. And sometimes your failures are very much the result of other people not doing what you've asked them to do. So the challenge for me, the greatest challenge for me as a leader is learning how to acknowledge that I can't do everything, that I have to empower others. And how am I going to do that? And again, this is where emotional intelligence has been such a critical growing opportunity for me. In relation to emotional intelligence, on a daily basis, I have to work out what is it that's going to make or inspire or encourage or get this person to do what I need them to do. And then once I work that out, I have to enact it. It becomes a lot easier as time goes on and you build a toolkit of strategies and an idea of the different motivations of individuals. That does get easier as you move along, but it's still a challenge. It's still a challenge to keep your own emotions in check when people are being very aggressive and critical of you, and being able to then work out how you're going to bring them along for the journey, the ride, without disenfranchising them. So you've got to really keep them in the camp. That's just an ongoing daily challenge that I find can be really rewarding, but also it can be soul destroying.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you so much for
Oh, it's a pleasure.
sharing your insights with us today.